All right, out of respect for those of you who are on time, I thought we'd get started. I am not Trevor Hughes. I'm Nuala Kelly. I'm the privacy leader at General Electric, and what am I currently? I'm past president of the IAPP. So Trevor, my good friend, the executive director, had a family situation that prevented him from traveling today and asked me to step in as moderator, which I'm delighted to do. I have spoken on this subject at prior CFP, so it's a lot of fun to be here again, and thank you very much for having us. We have a couple of other switcheroos on the panel, so I'll introduce all friends and colleagues in the privacy community. To my immediate right, Jonathan Cantor, who is now the Chief Privacy Officer at the Department of Commerce. We're delighted to say I've known Jonathan in several iterations of past jobs as privacy leader as well. And to his right, we have my dear friend John Koch. Now, John is stepping in for Callahan, another friend and the current privacy officer at the Department of Homeland Security. John is deputy, right? Is that right? You're deputy privacy officer, and started at the department in leading international privacy issues programs. So we're delighted to have you here. And then on the far end, Doug Miller, who leads privacy for AOL, who is stepping in for Jim Byrne. Different company, but great expertise, and we're delighted to have you as well. And the subject for today is, or the title is Corporate Apologists or Agent of Positive Change. And I'm going to ask each of the panelists to talk a little bit about their current role, how they got to where they are, their kind of overall answer to that question, which I hope is a positive one. It reminds me of a conversation we had at CFP going on 10 or 12 years ago, where Jason Catlin said, "You privacy officers, you're just a bunch of crash test dummies for your corporations." Isn't that true? So hard to answer a question like that, but I'm going to throw that out there to the team here and see what we come up with. And we're late in the day, and I'm well aware of everyone's biological rhythms and energy levels, so you're all welcome to share my chocolate, first of all, but also, more importantly, ask questions and join the dialogue. We'll give everybody a few minutes to start. Thanks. And do you want to go in order of sitting, or that's fine? Okay, Jonathan, you're on. Thank you.
Okay. So my name is Jonathan Cantor. I'm the Chief Privacy Officer and Director of Open Government at the Department of Commerce. I have been there for about, I think, 8 months now, which is kind of surprising. Time flies when you're having fun. Prior to that, I was the Executive Director for Privacy and Disclosure of the Social Security Administration. I was in that position, or the deputy to that position for 7 years, and then before that I was an attorney. So a little bit about how I got kind of into the field, kind of by accident, which I think a lot of people who are in the field get into it a little bit by accident. So I graduated from law school, and I started at Social Security, and I was doing a lot of contract law and a few other employment type law and things like that. And there was this area where they didn't have an attorney. Social Security was newly independent and been spun off the Department of Health and Human Services, and there were a lot of these data sharing agreements. This funny little law called the Computer Matching and Privacy Protection Act. Nobody knew anything about it, and nobody knew what to do with it. And they said, well, you're smart, you're a lawyer, and hey, you know contract law, you can figure it out. That was sort of how I stumbled into it. The more I got into it, the more I got involved in General Privacy Act issues. The Government Act of 2002 came along, and they were like, oh, you can figure that out too. And suddenly I was the privacy attorney, and then very quickly, when there was a vacancy in the privacy officer job, I became the privacy officer, and then I became the privacy officer's boss, as I used to call it, and ran the privacy program and grew it from a very, very small office to 54 people by the time that I left, and had a very mature program in Social Security. So kind of a very interesting pathway. Saw this opportunity at Commerce, knew what Commerce was getting into in this administration, and sort of the leadership role that it's playing in the internet economy and commercial data. It was sort of too much of an opportunity to pass up and let it go by. So that's what took me to Commerce, where I am about to start the same process over again. So that's sort of how I got here, and a little bit about me. John?
Thanks very much, Jonathan. I guess I share a little bit of what Jonathan said, which is I didn't really set out to pick privacy as my profession. It picked me in a way. I got involved in, first of all, the Freedom of Information Act and disclosure laws as an attorney advisor. at the Department of State. And that eventually took on other duties, and it took on the Privacy Act. It took on other information law questions. And at the Department of State, most of the attorneys are there because they really want to focus on these really sexy international law issues. And I was the information law attorney at the State Department. I often felt like it was the Rodney Dangerfield of the attorneys in that department because they were there doing the sexy treaty issues. I was there doing FOIA law, Privacy Act law. But the more I did it, the more I realized this is actually quite a useful skill. I had colleagues coming to me all the time for more and more questions about, well, what do I do with this request or that request? How do I safeguard this information? So that position evolved, and those skills continued to follow me around. I did take a small hiatus, which is probably not a logical path for most privacy professionals. I went to the former Soviet Union to work at an embassy for 2 years in Turkmenistan. Nothing to do with privacy at all, but came back. And again, I was looked at to take on more information law questions, and this time it was more of an international dimension. It was on cross-border information sharing with other governments. What are the privacy implications for protecting information on non-U.S. citizens? What are the obligations to share that we have for our own citizens when we share with a foreign government? And that went so far, and at about that time, DHS was stood up, and the Privacy Office was created, and by statute, that was the first CPO position created, and Nuala was in that position, and she was building an office at that time, and there were fantastic opportunities to really get involved in pushing privacy out just beyond the legal boundaries to really the policy boundaries. And my interest really was in that intersection between privacy and foreign policy. I saw privacy taking on more and more of a foreign policy role. And so it was a fantastic chance to make that jump and start looking at an issue that it's more and more got the attention of our senior policymakers now. As you can pretty much open the newspaper, I think, and see every day that there are cross-border issues having to do with privacy, especially with our European friends and allies. So I think I'm going to leave it there for the moment and pass it along to my colleague.
Good afternoon. I'm Doug Miller, and I've been at AOL for 15 years, doing privacy for nearly all of them since Steve Case's birthday in 1998. And trivia buffs among you know that's August 21st. I started at AOL almost by accident. I was working at the time heading government affairs at what was then called the Software Publishers Association, and dealing with a lot of issues like the encryption debate and this emerging digital commerce stuff, new internet issues. And about half a dozen of my colleagues had gone over to AOL, and everybody seemed to be enjoying it, and I couldn't for the life of me think of what I would do over there. They had a government affairs team. And but ultimately I got a call to do something called the General Manager of Community, which was a fascinating little basket of issues that included running the team that tracked down the child pornographers. It included setting content and conduct guidelines for the service. And it also sort of addressed how the company was organizing its response to a range of public policy issues. They pulled together the right people in the company. They needed somebody to offer this perspective. And so we started thinking very early on about a full range of public policy issues and how to be more responsible in the debate. Out of that arose a revision of our terms of service and our privacy policy, and then somebody, the general counsel, determined we should have somebody doing privacy every day. And so it fit very well with what I was doing, and I was happy to do it. And part of what I liked about it was, instead of it being an external role at the time, it was purely internal. And it was very much helping the company figure out how we were going to deal with these issues. And so it evolved. Ultimately, we had a chief trust officer for a while. When she left, my former colleague, Jules Polanetsky, who had been managing a lot of the trust stuff, the content and conduct stuff, stepped in and became the chief privacy officer. I was his deputy for a couple of years. Then Jules moved on to become the co-founder of the Future of Privacy Forum, and I took his role. And so it's almost 13 years of privacy. The role has evolved within the company. It's evolved in terms of where it reports. So right now it sits in the legal department, where I think it makes perfect sense because it allows us to be on the nexus of internal stuff that's going on and catching it, and also understanding what's going on externally so that it can inform what we do.
Thank you so much, all of you, for those great comments. They've raised some good questions about how to operationalize privacy for an organization, how to make it real. Let me start with a really high-level one, kind of brought on by the title of this panel, Corporate Apologists or Agent of Positive Change. I always question, is it to you more of a trusted insider role? Are you part of the organization? Or do you each, in your own way, feel that there's an external advocacy or as I said, ombuds-like quality to the role, or can you do both? What's your thought on not just the organizational placement, but the kind of ethos of being a privacy professional in an organization? Why don't we go in reverse order?
All right. Well, I think that the idea of is it a corporate apologist or is it an advocate, I think it's a dichotomy. I think of it as a continuum, and I would further argue that if you are purely a corporate apologist, you are not doing your job. I think if properly done, the role evolves into being an advocate for privacy. And what I mean by that is that you can set yourself up to try and manage these issues, and you can try and be an honest broker. You can pull together the right people. You can make sure that the proper viewpoints are heard, and there's something useful in that. I think obviously I love the quote from one of my all-time favorite shows, Sportsnet. Everybody remembers the executive producer Isaac, who once said, if you're dumb, surround yourself with smart people, and if you're smart, surround yourself with smart people who disagree with you. And so a good policy process in an organization has a variety of perspectives, and so one role for a privacy officer is to make sure that different perspectives are being heard. Privacy itself is multidisciplinary, and so you should treat it that way within the organization. So it's not just a legal thing, it's not purely a business thing, it's not purely a technological thing. Celebrate its multidisciplinary nature and make sure that the right people are getting heard. But I believe that after a period of time, if you're only being an honest broker and you're not taking responsibility for actually stepping up and representing privacy norms and values, you're missing the boat. And so I think as you build relationships within the organization, you build credibility, you build the right networks, and you build the right talent, you're in a position to really advocate and make sure that privacy is heard. I think that privacy is socially constructed, and that is the way to start.